Before George Orwell was George Orwell, he was Eric Arthur Blair, a 19-year-old man sailing to Burma on the SS Hereford to join the Indian Imperial Police. He stayed there until he was 24 in 1927, when he contracted dengue fever and returned to England. Burmese Days, Orwell's first novel after Down and Out in Paris and London, was published in 1934, but at around the same time he wrote 3 essays that together give an invaluable impression of an empire in demise and a clear and personal author in ascent. In 1928, Orwell travelled to Paris and set out to become a writer. He wrote How a Nation is Exploited, the British Empire in Burma in 1929 for the progressive journal Le Progrès Civique. In it, he describes Burma, how it's the source of 5% of the world's oil, how Britain took over the country between 1820 and 1888, and he describes the despotic techniques of British rule, the great maxim being never get something done by a European when an Oriental can do it. He describes how Burma's parliament, like each parliament of the Indian provinces, is merely a show of democracy with very little power. He concedes that the building of roads, canals, hospitals and schools benefit the Burmese, but are still built in the interest of Britain. What enables 12,000 men to subdue a population of 14 million, he asks, leaving them in peace to cultivate their fields and educating them only enough as for the needs of the empire, as education equals rebellion. And while the Burmese do not notice, the British extract from the mines and the oil wells and the paddy fields, while the resources are plentiful. And here was the trick to empire, the British allow specialised British machine-made products to be exported from Britain freely, while discouraging specialisation of production in the colonies by keeping customs tariffs prohibitively high so that the colonies supply low-cost, simple products and foods to the homeland. This short essay gives an incredibly striking impression of empire in such fewer words, and 2 years later, in 1931, Orwell wrote A Hanging for the London journal The Adelphi, an essay that adds another more personalised angle to his imperial attitude. In it, he recounts in meticulous detail the hanging of a Hindu man condemned for a crime not defined. It's a sodden morning of the rains. As they're walking towards the gallows, a dreadful thing had happened. A dog, come goodness knows whence, had appeared in the yard. It came bounding among us with a loud volley of barks and leapt around us, wagging its whole body, wild with glee at finding so many human beings together. As they continue, Orwell writes, the prisoner stepped slightly aside to avoid a puddle on the path. It is curious, he says, but till that moment I had never realised what it means to destroy a healthy, conscious man. When I saw the prisoner step aside to avoid the puddle, I saw the mystery, the unspeakable wrongness of cutting a life short when it's in full tide. This man was not dying. He was alive just as we were alive. All the organs of his body were working, bowels digesting food, skin renewing itself, nails growing, tissues forming, all toiling away in solemn foolery. But in 2 minutes, with a sudden snap, one of us would be gone. One mind less, one world less. Once the noose was fixed, the prisoner began crying out on his God. It was a high, reiterated cry of Ram, 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 Ram. Not urgent and fearful like a prayer or a cry for help, but steady, rhythmical, almost like the tolling of a bell. Suddenly the superintendent made up his mind. Throwing his head, he made a swift motion with his stick. "Chalo!" he shouted, almost fiercely. There was a clanking noise and then dead silence. The prisoner had vanished and the rope was twisting on itself. I let go of the dog and it galloped immediately to the back of the gallows. But when it got there, it stopped short, barked, and then retreated into a corner of the yard where it stood among the weeds looking timorously out at us. The Eurasian boy walking beside me nodded towards the way we had come with a knowing smile. "Do you know, sir, our friend," he meant the dead man, "when he heard his appeal had been dismissed, he pissed on the floor of his cell, from fright. Kindly take one of my cigarettes, sir. Do you not admire my new silver case, sir, from the box-wallah? 2 rupees 8 annas, classy European style." I found that I was laughing quite loudly. Everyone was laughing. Even the superintendent grinned in a tolerant way. "You better all come out and have a drink," he said, quite genially. "I've got a bottle of whiskey in the car. We could do with it." We all had a drink together, native and European alike, quite amicably. The dead man was 100 yards away. 3 years later, Orwell published Burmese Days, a tale of the decline of empire and the hopeless endeavours of a European in Burma, John Flory. The despondent tone of Burmese Days was condensed by Orwell in the 1936 essay, Shooting an Elephant, an indispensable metaphor for the slow, laboured death of the British Empire. The essay opens aphoristically. "In Moulmein in Lower Burma," Orwell writes, "I was hated by large numbers of people. The only time in my life that I have been important enough for this to happen to me." Orwell was a police officer in the town, but had already decided that imperialism was an evil thing, and was looking to leave Burma. "One day," he writes, "something happened which in a roundabout way was enlightening. It was a tiny incident in itself, but it gave me a better glimpse than I had had before of the real nature of imperialism." Orwell had received a phone call to tell him that a tamed elephant had gone crazy and was ravaging a bazaar. The Burmese had no weapons, and Orwell grabbed a rifle not large enough to kill it, but loud enough to scare it, and made off. Once there, he found that the elephant had already killed a man. "Never tell me," Orwell interjects, "that the dead look peaceful. Most of the corpses I have seen looked devilish." As an excited crowd gathered around the European with the gun, Orwell was told that the elephant was just a few hundred yards away in a paddy field. The crowd started shouting excitedly that Orwell was going to shoot the elephant. "It was a bit of fun to them," he writes, "as it would be to an English crowd. Besides, they wanted the meat. It made me vaguely uneasy. I had no intention of shooting the elephant. I had merely sent for the rifle to defend myself if necessary, and it is always unnerving to have a crowd following you." When the crowd found the elephant, he took not the slightest notice of the crowd's approach. He was tearing up bunches of grass, beating them against his knees to clean them and stuffing them into his mouth. "As soon as I saw the elephant," he says, "I knew with perfect certainty that I ought not to shoot him. It is a serious matter to shoot a working elephant. It is comparable to destroying a huge and costly piece of machinery, and obviously one ought not to do it if it can be possibly avoided." But Orwell looked at the crowd, which had grown to the thousands, looking on at the magic rifle like a conjurer about to perform a trick. They expected it of him. "It was at this moment," he writes, "as I stood there with the rifle in my hands, that I first grasped the hollowness, the futility of the white man's dominion in the East. Here was I, the white man with his gun, standing in front of the unarmed native crowd, seemingly the leading actor of the piece, but in reality, I was only an absurd puppet, pushed to and fro by the will of these yellow faces behind. I perceived in this moment that when the white man turns tyrant, it is his own freedom that he destroys. He becomes a sort of hollow, posing dummy, the the conventionalized figure of a sahib. For it is the condition of his rule that he shall spend his life in trying to impress the natives. And so in every crisis, he has got to do what the natives expect of him. He wears a mask, and his face grows to fit it. I had got to shoot the elephant. But, he continues, he didn't want to shoot the elephant at all, and a compromise came to him. He would walk close to the elephant to test his mood, then, if threatened, he could shoot, and if not, he'd have an excuse to leave him. But he says the sole thought in my mind was that if anything went wrong, those 2,000 Burmans would see me pursued, caught, trampled on and reduced to a grinning corpse. And if that happened, it was quite probable that some of them would laugh. That would never do. And so, Orwell decides he must shoot the elephant. He lies on the road to get a better aim. The crowd grew very still, and a deep, low, happy sigh, as of people who see the theatre curtain go up at last, breathed from innumerable throats. When I pulled the trigger, I did not hear the bang or feel the kick. One never does when a shot goes home. But I heard the devilish roar of glee that went up from the crowd. The elephant, like the decline of the British Empire, neither stirred nor fell, but every line of his body had altered. He looked suddenly stricken, shrunken, immensely old, as though the frightful impact of the bullet had paralysed him, without knocking him down. Orwell fires again. He trumpeted for the first and only time, and then down he came, his belly towards me, with a crash that seemed to shake the ground even where I lay. I waited a long time for him to die, but his breathing did not weaken. Finally, I fired my 2 remaining shots into the spot where I thought his heart must be. The thick blood welled out of him like red velvet, but still he did not die. His body didn't even jerk when the shots hit him. The tortured breathing continued without a pause. He was dying, very slowly and in great agony, but in some world remote from me, where not even a bullet could damage him further. I felt that I had got to put an end to that dreadful noise. It seemed dreadful to see the great beast lying there, powerless to move, yet powerless to die, and not even able to finish him. I sent back for my small rifle and poured shot after shot into his heart and down his throat. They seemed to make no impression. The tortured gasps continued as steadily as the ticking of a clock. Orwell recounts that he couldn't stand the elephant's agony, so he left. Later, he discovered it had taken the elephant an hour and a half to die, and the essay ends with a blunt, human truth. I often wondered, he writes, whether any of the others had grasped that I had done it solely to avoid looking like a fool. If you liked this video, then the 3 essays mentioned are in the Penguin collection, Orwell and Politics, which you can get through the link in the description below. If you do buy through that link, I'll get a small commission, which will really help this channel out. You can also subscribe, like and share below, and you can support me on Patreon by pledging $1 towards the creation of each new video by clicking here. Thanks for watching.